On tonight's panel, from the government, Helen Whately. She is a health minister with special responsibility for social care. It's her second stint in the role, having served in that position during the COVID pandemic. For Labour, Dr. Rosanna Allen-Khan. She's in the shadow cabinet, where she has the mental health brief. She's been an MP for Tooting in London since 2016 and is also an accident and emergency doctor. Mhairi Black is deputy leader of the Scottish National Party's 45 MPs at Westminster. 8 years ago, aged just 20 and still at university, she was elected as an MP for Paisley and Renfrewshire South. Dia Chakravarti is the Brexit editor at the Daily Telegraph. In a past life, she was political director for the Taxpayers Alliance, who campaigned for a low-tax society. She's also a singer of Bengali music and has released 2 albums. And the celebrity chef Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall has made a career in food, cooking it, writing about it, campaigning about it. He's authored dozens of books and fronted countless TV shows and documentaries about cooking, conservation and public health. Good evening. Welcome to Question Time from Exeter. Welcome to our panel. Lovely to see you. Welcome to our audience. Lovely to see you as well, of course. And welcome to you at home. We're on social media, as always, and we're also on a podcast on BBC Sounds after the programme, so do give that a listen. Let's kick off with our first question, which is from Amir Abbasi.
Is it time to give up on the Rwanda plan?
So the Court of Appeal ruled today that the government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda are unlawful, overturning a previous High Court ruling, and the government now says it's going to appeal to the Supreme Court. What do you think, Amir?
I think, if I've got this right, but 2 of the 3 judges said it was not safe. That should be enough. And spending more public money on dragging out what seems to be a very unfair policy and ongoing is just a waste of time and money.
Waste of time and money, Helen?
So, no, and the government disagrees with the conclusion of the Court of Appeal on this. The High Court last year supported it, was OK with it. The Court of Appeal, no, and as you just said, Fiona, the government plans to seek permission to appeal the latest view on it. But one reason why it's so important actually to do this is because we do need to stop the small boats. We can't have an open borders policy. Last year, 45,000 people came to the UK in small boats, on the one hand risking their lives as they did so, on the other hand putting huge pressure on, putting pressure on the UK. We know that, for instance, it's costing us £6 million a day to house those asylum seekers.
How much are legal cases costing? I'm interested, do you know?
Oh, so something we know actually from one of the latest reports.
The case is going to the High Court and the Court of Appeal.
That I don't have the cost for, but one of the reports that's just come out on this is that if we don't do something about this, by the end of 2026, it's going to be costing the country £11 billion a year. So that's not sustainable. So we have to do something different. We have to do something to deter people coming in small boats. Now, one thing that we know from international examples and indeed from our experience with the deal that we've done with the Albanian government for Albanians to be returned home if they come here in small boats is if people know they can't stay in the UK if they come here illegally, then it will deter them from coming here. That's such an important part of the policy. And then if we do that, we can do what we know we want to do in this country, which is actually be a place of haven and sanctuary for people who are refugees from war-torn countries, as we've done for people coming from Ukraine, coming from Afghanistan, coming from Syria. We want to be able to continue to do that.
I mean, 75%...
But we can't do that while people keep coming here in the numbers in
75% of
small
applicants
boats.
that come to the UK in small boats and other ways are granted asylum.
Well, but the important thing is...
So not all the people who come in small boats wouldn't get asylum.
Well, no, but the important thing is to make sure that we have the safe routes. And as you'll know, the audience will probably know, we work with the UN to provide safe routes to come here. But what we just can't continue to have, and as we know, we did have so many people coming here from Albania until we came to the agreement with the government of Albania that they should return home, which has reduced people coming here to Albania in small boats by 90%. So it does really make a difference. And just think, if I expect we're going to talk about the NHS this evening, NHS, schools, housing, all of that. If this number of people keep coming here to the UK through this route, I just don't see that as being sustainable, so we need to do something about it.
Mhairi, you're shaking your head all the way through.
Absolutely. I think that it's For two reasons, I think we should scrap it altogether. The first one being on a moral compass, because I think it's a barbaric system to begin with. There is no such thing as an illegal human being, especially not those who are fleeing war and persecution. But even secondly, I would add to that, even if you just look at it as purely a financial argument, the UK government's own figures show that the taxpayer is paying £169,000 per migrant. That's to send one person to Rwanda. It's going to cost £1.8 billion to deport all of the 11,000 people that have arrived in the UK this year. If the Tories are serious about getting money spent in good places, it would have been an idea over the last decade not to keep implementing austerity, not to have COVID contracts going out to Paris, or PPE that isn't fit for purpose.
Let me hear a little bit from our audience. There's a woman there in the green dress.
Hello, yes. It is unfortunate that some of the rhetoric coming from this current government is in parallel to what happened in the 1930s. As a child, I couldn't understand how the Nazis came to power, and now I understand it. We're starting to other people. A very small percentage of people actually come to this country. They're coming in the boats because we've cut off the legal routes. And I cannot understand why a government which is full of people of colour, some of whom came to this country as a result of the kindness of governments before, are using this rhetoric when they have tanked our economy. 6 weeks of Truss and Kwarteng tanked the economy so that children, people like my daughter, will be paying £400 a month more for her mortgage. They are deflecting all of that by talking about small boats.
OK. Right, we'll come back to that. The man there in the dark blue top. Yes.
They are risking their lives when they come. I'm on a local lifeboat crew, so I appreciate the dangers of the sea. But those people risk their lives to make that journey, and obviously there are criminals making money from this, but I don't think they will not risk their lives just because they might go to Rwanda or they may be sent back. They're desperate people, and they will still continue to come, I believe.
Rosanna.
Firstly, I just think we need to take a moment and think about what drives people to leave everything they have, take their children on treacherous journeys. I've been a humanitarian doctor now for over a decade. I've seen the very worst of humanity. I've seen genocide. I've seen parents who have to choose to flee with the children that are still alive or stay lying next to the graves of those they've had to bury. These are the people we're talking about when we're othering them, when we're talking about them as though they are not humans. The choices they have to take to get into those boats to seek a better life isn't easy. Do you think they even want to do that? Of course they don't. They would like to live in peace where they are. But it is inhumane. It is unworkable. And today, rightly, it's been found to be unlawful.
And so what is Labour's policy, Rosanna? Because Keir Starmer also talks about wanting to stop people smuggling and people coming across the channel.
I would say, as well as the economic argument, which has already been laid out, I would like to ask Helen.
Well, hang on. Let's hear what Labour's policy is first. Let's hear what Labour's policy is first for you.
But I would like to know how she sleeps at night with
Helen, I will let you
to Rwanda on a plane.
I will let you answer that in a minute. But let's just hear about Labour's policy since we have you here.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer says he also wants to break the people smuggling, stop people coming across in boats because it's so dangerous. What would Labour do instead? Would you let more people in different ways? What's your plan?
Firstly, we have to tackle the criminal gangs. I've met people who have been coming over in boats that have been deliberately half filled with fuel so that they have to turn back to France to pay more money to make an attempt again. We absolutely have to tackle the criminal gangs.
But how do you do that? That's not easy.
Which Labour have a border force plan for. Also, they would clear the backlog. This government is living in backlog Britain, where most asylum claims haven't been dealt with and people are living in inhumane conditions, women and children in hotels that are not fit for rats. That is what we're looking at. We would also reform legal routes, as the lady already mentioned, and stop gangs exploiting people who are fleeing the very, very worst of humanity.
OK. Let's hear from the man at the back. I'm trying to see you there. Yes, with the glasses. Yes, right at the very back of the front row. Yes.
Yeah, it's a complete myth that the public sector is being blocked by migrants. It's the migrants that I work for the NHS, and it's the migrants that run the NHS and have done since it was since it started in 1948. So we actually need more staff in the NHS at the moment.
And the man with the glasses there in the green sweater, yes.
It seems to me that it's got to be time to ditch the Rwanda plan, because it's going to cost the government hundreds of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money, both, as Mari said, per asylum seeker, and also to legally do the scheme. And the government puts about a lot of this rhetoric that if you don't support the scheme, you want people smugglers to thrive.
Yep.
But I think we all recognise we don't want people smugglers to thrive. But yet, the Home Secretary not being able to answer at a select committee how a 16-year-old orphan from an East African country fleeing war can get to this country safely and legally. You need to put those things in place before you deal with the boats issue. Because currently, this is the only option that people have, is to come across on small boats. And the government looks as if it's punishing those in desperate situations.
OK. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my feelings about this have been very well expressed by the audience so far and by Rosanna and Mari, but I was flabbergasted to hear Suella Braverman say today that she thinks most Britons are disappointed by this decision.
Rubbish.
I'm absolutely sure that most people in this room are delighted by this decision. There's a Somali British poet called Warsan Shire who said in a line of poetry, "No one puts a child in a boat unless the water is safer than the land." I think that's both beautiful and also tragic, and it expresses perfectly the plight of these people. Nobody gets on these boats unless they're desperate. And to reel out a sort of shoddy bit of populism, a high-profile policy that grabs the attention of the right-wing press, gets amplified in a really unpleasant way, which our friend alluded to in the very first comment from the floor, that frankly smacks of language of a very, very dark time, is completely unacceptable. It also means, of course, that one of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges is going down. Perhaps that leaves room for another pledge on something that we really care about, which he hasn't yet made any pledge about to deliver, and that's our climate. But we may get to that a little bit later.
OK. So, look, in the interest of balance, I'm just going to ask, is there anyone here who supports the Rwanda policy and who wants to speak up? Because we have a lot of Conservative voters here in the audience. Yes, the man at the back. Let's just get a microphone to you.
Are you suggesting that France is unsafe?
OK, hang on, I'm just asking. I mean, if there's no one here, then let's recognise that fact. Is there anyone here who supports the Rwanda policy? Yes, the man here. You do support it at the back. I don't want to take words from your mouth. OK, let's hear from the man in the glasses here.
I don't support the Rwanda policy as much, but I do agree with the guy when he says these people get into small boats. They've crossed several safe countries to get to France. Why do they not stay in other countries? There is no need to get into a small boat and risk your life.
OK. But just so I'm clear, because we're very careful how we select our audiences here, and I'm not trying to overstate the importance. This is not a YouGov poll. But what I'm seeing here is that even though we have more people who voted Conservative than for any other single party here, is there anyone here who supports sending people to Rwanda?
Good on you.
I will come to you. Forgive me. Do you want to respond to that, Helen, and to what you've heard?
Now or after?
No, just do it now. I'll come to you in a moment, if you forgive me.
Yeah, there's a few things to pick up there.
And I just wonder what you think of the fact that there's no support in the audience for sending asylum seekers to Rwanda.
Well, I think on that specific point, it's because this is a very hard problem to solve. And I think most of us feel that we want to be welcoming people and understand that people have made hard and difficult journeys to try and come to the UK before they choose to get into a small boat. And though, yes, they're in France, they've crossed several safe countries, but we know that they have started out from places where life is very hard. And I went a few years ago to the migrant camp known as the Jungle in Calais. I took a carload of donations, and I went with some other Conservative MPs, and we talked to the mainly young men who were in that camp and heard their stories. And I heard their hard stories and their reasons for so much wanting to come to the UK. And so, I heard those stories directly, but it doesn't mean that it's morally right to continue a situation where we have people risking their lives in small boats and paying people smugglers to do that. We have to do something different to deter that. And I actually haven't heard anything which is a real policy on that from Labour or from the SNP.
We have a 5-point plan.
No,
We're happy to repeat it.
We know, we're working with France. We've got the deal with Albania. We're investing in the border. We're investing in other ways to do it. But we know that doesn't work. We know what we need to do is, on the one hand, deter people from coming here illegally, and then on the other hand, make sure that we have the safe routes. We've welcomed 500,000 people in recent years from other countries here through safe routes, whether that's, for instance, the many thousands of refugees who've come here from Ukraine. There may be people in the audience who are hosting Ukrainian families.
And just in terms of Rosanna's point about children, as I understand it, but correct me if I'm wrong, if you're under 18, you don't go to Rwanda.
Oh, right, yes.
So it's OK if you're 18 then? You fled war, you fled genocide.
I'm just making the point that if you're a child, you don't go to Rwanda.
I'm not suggesting any of these things are easy.
When you're 18, well, that's OK.
I just don't think any of these things are easy, but I think you have
It's inhumane.
You have to make difficult. That is what being a government is about. It's about making difficult decisions.
And it's now unlawful.
11 billion if you want to talk about the economics.
Let's bring Dia. You've been very patient. Forgive me.
No, I'm happy to listen. This policy, I don't think is going to work. So I think it's actually been quite lucky for Rishi Sunak that the court has just struck it down, because now he can say, we tried, but it wasn't going to work, and it's not my fault. The court has just struck it down. It was never going to work. How was it ever going to work? All the process involved in it, all the money involved in it. We keep hearing about the what is it that you said?
It's 169,000.
That is actually the gross amount, but you know, it's something like 69,000 per person, I think, which is also a huge amount of money. But this was never, ever going to work.
You say that what? Because you thought it was never going to get through the courts?
Oh, it was never going to... Well, if it ever went through the courts, people who are coming here, even if they're not desperate, because I don't think a lot of them will be fleeing war-torn societies, but a lot of them will be coming from extremely volatile and extremely insecure societies. I'm one of them. I didn't come here as a refugee, but I'm definitely a first-generation immigrant. And when you are coming from societies where you have no job security, where if you go outside, you may or may not come back home, you know, you have a very different sense of life there. Everything is very insecure. You can get on those boats, even from a country like France, and come to the country where you think you and your family would have the best chance. And that's what actually makes me very proud of being a Brit as well, despite what the lady over there just said. Because despite whatever the people think the rhetoric is, despite whatever people think how difficult it can be for some migrants at times, we are still the best country for migrants, for ethnic minorities to come in and settle in. And we see that when we do surveys. I've certainly voted with my feet. I certainly wouldn't live anywhere else other than here. And what this gentleman says was very interesting, because you said, sir, you work as a life... Right. So in international terms, the only place where a sort of keeping illegal immigrants out has worked in Australia, where I think the policy was to just send the boats back. Now,
well, they went to a particular island,
but they also did send the boats back, and that meant that there was inevitably a risk of some of those boats drowning. We live in a country where people like this gentleman would probably not allow a boat to drown when he sees that happening in front of his eyes. So you've got a very different culture. So if you say that we can just do one thing and, you know, send the boats back, that's just not going to work for our country. But also, Rwanda's not going to work for our country. I don't know what the solution is, but I'm very interested to see how opposed to this Rosanna is, because in a few months' time, I think it's very likely that Labour's going to be in power, and Rosanna might have to come back and defend a policy very similar to that, because this...
I'll make it very clear for you, I will never defend a policy anything like that.
Because this is not going to go away, and this is not going to be just the Conservatives' headache. It will come back to haunt the next government as well.
All right. OK. I'm going to move on. I want to get through some more questions. We just got one more programme I want to tell you before the summer break. We will be in Fleetwood in Lancashire. So if you want to come along, just follow the instructions on the screen. Fleetwood in Lancashire. Come and be part of our audience. We'd love to see you. OK, let's take our second question. From Caroline Leach.
Hello there. With Thames Water on the brink of collapse, is it time our water companies were taken back into public ownership?
For me, yes. I'm going to go out on a limb, yes. I mean, certainly my heart absolutely says that it's time to renationalise the water companies. I mean, Thames, what an absolute mess. I think what's been incredibly shocking is just to understand, as it started to spill out over the months, but then particularly in the last 24 hours with Thames, the incredibly cynical business model that these privatised water companies are operating on. First of all, they're taking our money, right? We give them, we pay our money to the water companies so that we get what we expect is clean water, good sewage treatment, and please, clean rivers and clean beaches that we can all swim in and enjoy. And then, so they take that money, and then they borrow extraordinary amounts of money when the interest rates are low, and they give huge dividends to their shareholders while absolutely failing to deal with the mess that's going on, with the falling apart of the infrastructure, with the frankly shit, if I can say so, that's going into our rivers and arriving on our beaches. And when the proverbial shit hits the fan for them, and they're £10 billion in debt, suddenly they're looking to their shareholders to put money in. The shareholders don't want to do it.
Can I just interject for one moment?
That way of doing
hang on, because we are on iPlayer at 8 o'clock, which is before the watershed. Now, I've got to be honest, I don't know what the rules are on iPlayer, but I apologise if anyone was offended by that word. After the watershed, feel free.
I apologise a bit if anyone was offended by that. But, I mean, this is a subject that requires strong language because it's an absolute disgrace. And so yeah, renationalisation would be that's the way this should be done.
Do you think we can afford it?
Well, obviously there's a cost to that, but one thing that's being talked about, and one reason that perhaps some of my fellow panellists might give for not doing this, because it's going to be so expensive, is that we need to compensate the shareholders. We do not need to compensate the shareholders. There is legal precedent. Northern Rock is an interesting example of that. But lawyers have been. There is legal precedent that says the shareholders have had their shot at this company at making profits out of it. It's failed them. We do not need to compensate them. We shouldn't spend.
I mean, don't forget some of those shareholders. For example, one of them is University Lecturers' Pension Fund. So you're not worried about them.
Well, they make their decisions about where they put their money, and they take the consequences of what happens to that business.
Helen. What is going to happen about Thames Water?
Well, I can't go into Thames Water specifically. It's a private company. I can't speculate on the state of their finances.
But we know the government is looking at, we understand the government's looking at plans to take it back into public ownership should it need to.
Ofwat, as a regulator, monitors financial viability of major key water companies, and that's something that they do. But on the question about whether nationalising is the right answer, I would say a clear no. It's not an easy answer. I'm sure Mario will talk about this in a moment, but I would think that Scotland is an example of why it's not an easy answer. And one reason is, in Scotland, water is nationalised.
Yes.
You have a huge problem with sewage outflows. Last year in Scotland,
like England, I can assure you.
19 million litres of sewage was dispersed into Scottish waterways. That's 19,000 Olympic swimming pools worth, and you only monitor 70% of sewage outflows. So in England, the government is acting on this. Now, I don't accept the situation that we have at the moment at all. I don't want to see pollution and sewage going into our waterways.
Do you think the privatisation model has failed?
Is pretty much a coastal constituency, so I'm also not happy with it locally. You know, my kids swim in the sea with me. Not happy with dirty water.
So do you think this model of ownership has failed?
So I think what we have, I think what we have at the moment is the consequences clearly of a combination of a Victorian infrastructure and the changes to rainfall and housing and things that have got us to the situation. The other thing that's changed is we are monitoring. So when in 2010, when Labour left office, only 7% of outflows were monitored. Nobody really knew very much about the problem. Now, under a Conservative government, 90% of outflows are being monitored. And by the end of this year, 100% of outflows will be monitored. So we will really be monitoring the problem. Clearly, monitoring is one reason why we know about it. We have legislated to require the water companies to fix this, to invest £56 billion over the next 25 years to fix this.
So it's going to take... Because I remember you coming on question time before making this point. It's going to take 25 years to fix.
So we know that you can't do it overnight. I believe this, in fact, Labour's policy is to stop it right away. Estimated cost around 600 billion. How you would do that, it also involves, unfortunately, sewage going into people's homes. So that is not the right answer. But we are taking action. I want it to be as fast as possible, but I am realistic that it will take time, but it has to happen and it will happen.
All right, there's lots of hands up. Let's hear from some of you. Yes, the woman in the I think it's a white dress you're wearing with the glasses, yeah.
You're saying 25 years, but we're in a climate emergency. We've got severe drought problems. We've got severe water scarcity issues. In the UK alone, we actually don't have enough water as it is to actually go around. And you're talking about solving a problem in 25 years' time. So not only that, you've then got the pollutants that are going into the river, the pollutants that's going into the sea. They're not only people, as Hugh said, that we rightly swim in, exactly around this area, but they're then flooded. So all of that contaminants is then going back into 1 in 5 buildings. So you're not doing anything. You're saying 25 years. In 28 years, that is the 3 degrees we're going to see in the UK climate change.
OK, let's hear from the woman behind you. Yeah.
Water's an essential. We need it to live. I don't understand why it's a not-for-profit business. I think the shareholders have made their money. Those dividends, 72.
Let me I'll come back in a minute. So, Rosanna, the question is it time the water companies were taken back into public ownership? Labour's not proposing that either, is it?
No,
Labour's not supporting the idea of public ownership.
No, but firstly, on Helen's monitoring point, you said the word monitoring so many times. If you're monitoring very closely, then you know that in the River Exe, in just last year alone, there were 488 raw sewage dumps. That equates to 50 days of the year.
Of course, under a Labour government, you wouldn't have known that because you guys weren't monitoring.
Told you that?
Yeah, so the monitoring is what tells us under your government we wouldn't have known.
Labour believe in value for money and not punishing the bill payers. And actually, we shouldn't be letting water companies off the hook to walk away with £72 billion in their back pocket while our children are having to literally swim in sewage. So what Labour believe is that we should, we back Ofwat's call to link pay to performance. So if you're a company that is putting, quite frankly, sewage in people's rivers, streams and in the sea, the price to fix that should come out of the dividends. It shouldn't come out of the taxpayers' pocket. And I'm just going to finish. I'm going to finish my point. Because we also support Ofwat's ability to cap bills. Labour fully believe that the taxpayer should not foot the bill for the government's failings to be asleep at the wheel.
So we have legislated to link bonuses and dividends to performance. We've legislated for that. Now, the other day, there was a vote on whether there should be unlimited fines, which my party voted for, and you guys abstained. So how did you not know that everything was going to fall apart in Thames Water this week, if you were monitoring so closely?
So when it comes to the issues of these water companies being loaded with debt, for example, is there anything Labour's suggesting about that? The water companies being loaded with debt. As we know, when the water companies were privatised 30 years ago, there was no debt. Now there are many, many billion pounds worth of debt. And that's part of the problem, as we're all finding out now.
Well, the shareholders seem to be profiting just fine at the moment and doing perfectly well. £72 billion.
No, for sure. So I just wonder what Labour's plan is for that.
Basically, we're calling on the government to get round the table and fix this. People are... But did you back our cost of living crisis?
I'm pretty sure you didn't.
People living in a cost of living crisis. Now, on top of wondering how they're going to pay their food bills, wondering if they're going to be able to heat their homes in winter, wondering if they can get an ambulance, and now wondering if they're going to turn on the taps and not have any water.
When we legislated to connect...
I will let you in.
So when we legislated to make sure that bonuses and dividends were related to performance, Did you back that vote? Have you backed that legislation?
We back off-what's call to link pay to performance.
But we've done that.
You haven't done it.
All right. I have a feeling we're not getting anywhere with this. What do you think?
That's it.
No. OK, Mary.
Sorry. Well,
I've got a couple of points to make after that. So, hold on. The first thing is I spoke recently about a cost of greed crisis. And this is the perfect example of it. Because how is it that we have a company that has been making extortionate profits for years, particularly during a cost of living crisis? And when you're talking about the infrastructure and things, why the hell didn't they invest in having a proper system set up? Instead, they're happy to take all of the profits, hoard them, and then turn to the taxpayer when it all goes, it's up. Respecting the law.
What has happened to the language on this programme tonight?
Just if I could also add, as you touched on at the start, Scotland is the only nation within the UK that has its water in public hands. Now, the reason we do that is because in Scotland we see water as being a fundamental basic right. It shouldn't be there for anyone else to profit off of. And this is where, and I appreciate we're not in Scotland right now, but from a Scottish perspective, this is where things like the Internal Market Act become really dangerous, because devolution allowed us to put water into public hands. The Internal Market Act is creating a back door by which the UK government can come in and do whatever the hell they like.
So, Mary, when you've got the Marine Conservation Society saying urgent action is needed to tackle Scotland's sewage problem, they would indicate there is a problem there.
I can accept that, but at least there's still water coming out of taps. At least
there is still water coming out of taps for most of England as well.
For going in a swim, it is nowhere near what it is like here. And the levels of sewage that are getting pumped into English waters is disgusting, not just metaphorically, but it's literally.
Situation in Scotland.
There's lots of your hands up. I'm going to come round you. I'll just bring Dear in because I left it a long while before. I don't want to do that again.
No, that's fine. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Northern Ireland also has privatised water, and I don't think they're doing.
2 out of 4.
I don't know that. I don't think they're doing very well. But Marie, with all the talk, Marie, sorry.
That's okay.
With all the talk of nationalisation and Scotland doing OK. There was a time when Scotland, because it was under national ownership, it was really struggling with funds, and you had to look at PFI contracts to do that. So this is always an issue with my mistake, with nationalisation. Funding becomes the biggest issue. So
give Scotland independence, and you have the full powers to do it properly.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said if Scotland had the full financial powers of a normal independent country, we wouldn't be in the situation that you're describing.
Yes, but are you saying you'd have unlimited funds for the water companies?
For instance, the Scottish,
you would have to face the issues that other countries face too.
The Scottish Parliament has no borrowing powers whatsoever. The reason we believe in independence is because we want governments to be able to make policies tailored towards Scotland instead of funneling millions into plans like Rwanda.
Right.
Carry on.
So, with that in mind, when the problem with nationalisation, or the problem that England faced when water was under state control, is that funding, capital always had to compete with other sectors such as the NHS, such as education, and it was a drastically underfunded institution, which is why it had to be privatised. But I think people are right to be absolutely livid about this. You guys have it the worst, I think. If you here are under South West Water,
yes,
you are one of the worst.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't need me to come and tell you about this, of course, but of course you're angry about this. They have been fined, I think, something like 2 million for a period of 4 years when they were just contaminating completely. I always think about when there's a choice between nationalisation and privatisation. Privatisation in this context didn't work very well. But it's a bit like when you go to a doctor and for whatever reason you've ended up going to a really rubbish doctor. Maybe they weren't vetted very well, maybe they went to really rubbish universities, didn't really make the grades, whatever. You then decide, you know what? This doctor isn't working for me, I'm just going to go to the pharmacist down the road from now on. Now, the pharmacist might be kindly, the pharmacist might be someone...
Gosh, where's this going, dear? We're wanting to get to the point here.
The pharmacist is not qualified to do what the doctor needs to do, which is a complex operation. And the state, which automatically means politicians, these people, with the greatest respect to my co-panelists, power is in the hands of these people, and they will again and again and again make a mess of things. Mark my word. You need better companies, you need better regulated companies, but it has to stay privatised.
OK, let's hear from a few of you, and then we're never going to get there, dear. Where on earth it was going? But we got there in the end. Yes, a woman right at the back with the white T-shirt and the green cardi, yes.
Isn't it a little bit naive to say that the government won't be able to employ people who are capable of a job? And hopefully that would be a Labour government. But if we look to what Scotland's done, they've got independence in terms of your water, so that's free, your prescriptions are free, and your education is free. Yep. And if I could move, I would.
OK. We'd welcome you. Man with the pink check shirt there. Yes, you, sir.
Hello. Isn't one of the issues that Ofwat have consistently and significantly failed to fulfil their remit?
Yeah. Man here in the blue shirt, right at the very front.
Yeah, just to further that point, really, why hasn't the regulator come down on Ofwat?
Yeah.
I also work for a different utility.
Well, Ofwat is the regulator.
That's what I'm saying. Why haven't they performed and actually done their job? Because how have they managed to take on all of this debt? And for us to be able to take that debt on now, when we nationalise it, if we nationalise it, it's not going to be possible. And then other utilities, I work for the electricity industry, and our network is solid because we've invested in it.
Okay. And as you say, Ofwat is actually the arm of the, it's the arm of the state. That's the quango.
The regulator would find us so hard that there's no point. Yeah. We might as well do the work to improve the infrastructure. 2 million for South West Water over a few years is nothing compared to what they're being paid for all of their shareholders.
Okay. Let me ask you briefly, are you satisfied with the conduct of Ofwat in this particular case?
Well, I'm not satisfied with the situation with water companies.
But are you satisfied with Ofwat as a regulator, given the situation we're in with Thames Water now?
Well, I can't, as a government, I cannot talk and sort of hypothesise on the situation or speculate on the situation with Thames Water.
I'm asking you, no, I'm not asking you, but we know that Thames Water is trying to get money from shareholders. We know that it's in trouble. Are you satisfied that Ofwat generally is doing the right job when it comes to the water companies? Because it's not the only one that's looking dicey at the moment, Thames Water.
So what I'm not satisfied is overall the situation where we've got to.
But you have total confidence
the contamination of the waterways.
But as far as Ofwat's concerned, because there's two people now have asked about it, do you have total confidence in Ofwat?
Well, I'm just not going to. I don't want to get drawn into the rights and wrongs.
OK, all right, you're not going to answer it.
If you will allow me.
Very quickly.
I think the model, the privatised for-profit model, is a busted flush. And the main reason it doesn't work is because it's actually a series of monopolies. So people can literally help themselves, and they haven't been properly scrutinised. At least if it's in public ownership, ultimately, the government's answerable. And if they don't get it right, we know how to get rid of them.
Free. The lady up there says it's free.
OK, go on. Very briefly, Helen. Very briefly.
I just wanted to pick up on one point. There was a lady up there who was talking about things being free. I mean, the problem is, ultimately, these things do have to be paid for, and it's to be paid for by taxpayers. And the point that Dia made was absolutely right about the history and why privatisation, because something like water, the infrastructure, tends to lose out in the competition for investment.
All right.
Privatisation has led to £160 billion being invested in water infrastructure.
Let me move on.
And there's going to be more, but we have to make sure the rules are right.
OK. Sorry, you're shouting out, but I can't hear what you're saying. OK, all right. Let's take another question from Leslie. Leslie Yoffe.
Could you tell me why, now COVID is on the back burner, we still can't get to see a doctor when we want to?
Are you asking this from personal experience, Leslie?
Yes, I am.
So what happened with you?
Yeah, I collapsed and I was taken to hospital and I was treated extremely well, went through many departments and got home, went to phone the doctor. That was 7 months ago and I still haven't seen him. Spoken on the phone, but he hadn't seen, you know, the injuries that I had or...
And is that because the doctor's saying he or she doesn't need to, or just can't give you the time?
I presume can't give me the time.
7 months, you say?
It's 7 months now.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Leslie. I am. Rosanna.
Leslie, I'm really sorry to hear that, and it totally breaks my heart. And I work on the NHS front line, so I've never stopped doing my shifts in A&E. And when I go and do my shifts, I hear the same stories echoed. And I hear people who've been unable to get the help and support that they need, and I meet patients. For example, an 80-year-old lady who was caring for her 3 young grandchildren. She'd had a lump that had been growing. She hadn't been able to get an appointment to see someone. And by the time I saw her in A&E, I knew that what we were looking at was inoperable cancer. This is not a singular event. This is actually common practice now. We have over 7 million people on NHS waiting lists, and we have a Conservative government that have failed our country. It is not okay that when I show up to an A&E shift and I'm doing a paediatric A&E shift, that there are children who've been in mental health crisis in the department for 3 days because there's nowhere to go. It is not okay that there is a death rate associated with people not being able to get an ambulance when they need one. And it is not okay that people are needlessly dying because they cannot get the help that they need. That has happened on this Conservative government watch. And Labour have a plan to grow the workforce. We will double the number of medical school places. We will recruit thousands and thousands of new nurses and midwives. And we will make sure that mental health gets the fair treatment it deserves, and it's no longer the Cinderella service of the NHS.
And for people like Leslie, and I expect that she's not the only one in the audience who's not managed to see a GP as quickly as they would like, the workforce plan, which is many in the NHS are calling for, is going to take time, obviously.
Yeah, it will.
So in the next, I mean, you're hoping to be in government, what, next year or at the very latest the year after?
ASAP.
So what, in the meantime, should you be in government? Can people expect anything to improve, given how long it will take to get more GPs in the system, or will they just have to wait?
Well, we have got record waiting lists, and we have a Conservative government that didn't deliver on their manifesto pledge since 2010 to grow more GPs. Well, we have a fully costed workforce plan, and I can tell you exactly what it is.
But the point I'm making is that will just take time, obviously. Of course it will take time. Naturally. So in the meantime, if in the next year or two, at the very least, or the first couple of years, should Labour be in power, honestly, should people expect that actually not that much is going to change until these new GPs and all the rest of it, should this happen, get trained up? Or is there anything people can expect to actually get better in the short term?
So that is
realistically.
That is an absolutely fair question. And I'm never, ever going to sit here and say to you that overnight, the moment we're in government, it's all going to be fixed. We have a plan. Of course, it takes time to grow a workforce, but we have a commitment to do so. We have costed it, and it will take time to train people, but we also have to really importantly value the staff that we've got. 6 million mental health sick days were taken in the NHS just last year alone. We go to work with one arm tied behind my back. We have to perform intimate examinations in cupboards and see our patients lying on floors. I'm sorry, but NHS staff and patients deserve better than that.
Gia. So the question is, with COVID on the back burner, why can't I get to see a doctor when I want to?
Oh, it does seem to be reforms are necessary, and it seems like Rosina's colleague, Wes Streeting, has been talking about reforms himself, which I think is quite a shift in Labour's policy. But I don't know how Rosina feels about it. I don't know, Rosina, in January, when you were asked on Radio 4, you weren't quite sure whether you were supportive of Wes Streeting's reform proposals. Have you made your mind up yet?
And which reform proposal are you talking about particularly? Are you talking about reforming GP contracts?
Yes, yeah. I wasn't unsure on any radio of what you're referring to, but ultimately, thank you for giving me another opportunity to talk about our plan.
Because I'm here as a listener too. You need to convince me as a voter too.
So you don't know what she's referring to. That's what you're saying.
I'm very confused by what she's saying, because ultimately,
what do you mean?
We have a plan.
So you were asked on Radio 4 in January, when Wes Streeting came out saying, "I don't understand why BMA stands in the way of us reforming the NHS in a way which means that we can provide better services."
We need to reform bits of the NHS. NHS in order to have a service that works.
And how is that going
I'm
to...
sorry, but I don't see why it's relevant that you're referring to an interview I had in January that no one even knows about.
Oh, I do.
At a point when we're talking
because
about the NHS.
Because I'm really interested to hear what the reform policies are for Labour, because we are at a junction.
Well, I'll very happily tell you
This
again.
is your
Okay, well, we better let Rosanna off.
Go for it. Convince me.
Very happy to tell you. So, first of all, in mental health, we will recruit 8,500 new mental health staff.
You're talking about GP contracts reform,
I'm talking about funding on all of these things where we think the funding is going to come from.
Oh, I can tell you exactly where the funding
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I can tell you exactly where the funding
in the nicest possible way. Don't take too long about it, otherwise I can't get anyone else in.
So in mental health, for example, we will close the carried interest tax loophole, and we will levy VAT on private school fees, which will generate us 1.1 billion, which will pay for our mental health pledges. Our workforce plan will be funded by closing the non-dom tax loophole.
Right, and that's assuming all of those things. When you put those new taxes in, you're going to keep getting the revenue exactly at that level. Otherwise, you're looking at a tax gap.
Do you feel better off after 13 years of Conservative government? Do you feel that if one of your children urgently needed to go to hospital, and I hope they never do, that you'll be able to get that ambulance? Do you feel that if you were sick or someone you loved was ill, you'd be able to get that GP appointment? Does anyone in this audience feel that after
I would love to bring the audience in. So let's do that, Rosanna, because you're all sitting there very patient. I can hear a bit of grumbling because you're not getting a word in. So let's hear from you. Yes, the guy there in the short-sleeve shirt, yeah.
I don't think that anyone's expecting Labour to have a magical fix to the problems that the Tories have spent sort of 13 years implementing. The Conservative minister that we have here has spent the entire show sort of being passive. She used the word monitoring 15, 20 times earlier.
When we were talking about water.
Exactly. But the sort of way that questions are answered by this government shows the way that they're just passive in everything they do. They just have sat and watched as the country sort of crumbled around them in the last few months.
All right. And the person at the back there with the check shirt, if you see at the back with the glasses, you got your hand up there, yes. Yes, the young woman there, yes.
So, one of the biggest things I always find with crisis politics like this is that the opposition and the government very rarely actually collaborate. If you do have a plan that will take a long time to implement,
I have tried.
Why can't the government and your own party collaborate now, save the time in the future for if and when you do get elected?
Okay, all right. And the woman next to you.
So every time we have a change of government, you each decide, oh, we're going to tweak this and we're going to tweak this in the health service. I have just recently retired, and we have new things every time, and it's like, why can't the pair of you, the party, it being independent with both parties going around a table? I'm agreeing with this lady. My husband had a new GP. He has only recently seen him, and he changed. The GP changed because we retired 18 months ago. My husband doesn't have electronic phone, so he can't do an e-consult. And there are lots of people of my generation and over that are not savvy doing an e-consult.
Hugh.
So there is one huge spectre, one particular disease that is causing so much trouble for the NHS that if any government doesn't take it super seriously and have a specific plan to reduce its influence on the population, they'll never sort out the NHS. And that problem is type 2 diabetes, which is caused largely by our life choices and most of all by the diets we choose. Now, there was a point when this government almost had it in their sights. They had a list of policies. They consulted with some really good NGOs. The work team around Jamie Oliver did some fantastic work on this. Last year, Henry Dimbleby put out a brilliant report showing the way for a healthier population, suggesting policies like expanding the sugar tax and restricting junk food advertising, especially to kids, and getting much more transparency from the big food companies on actually the balance of ingredients in their food. We need more fibre in our diets, we need more fresh fruit and vegetables. And we need policy drivers from government to make this happen. There was a moment when Boris Johnson, partly because of his own brush with COVID, and which was for him genuinely a near-death experience, made the association between his own physical shape and the closeness of his brush with death. And he came very close to rolling out this policy. But unfortunately, we've rolled back into this right-wing ideology that we cannot help our population live healthy lives. We cannot show them the way. We're not allowed to educate them or direct their choices in the right direction. Well, unfortunately, at the moment, all our choices are being directed in the wrong direction by big business, by incredibly powerful advertising, and by a food sector that's completely out of control. And we need to get a grip on that, or we'll never get a grip on the health of the nation.
OK. Right. Helen, let me bring back the question. Why can we still not get to see a doctor when we want to, Leslie is asking.
Yes,
Leslie hasn't seen her doctor for 7 months.
I'm shocked and I'm really worried by that, Leslie. That is not how it should be. And I care enormously about you and everyone else being able to get the healthcare that they need. The reason I'm even involved in politics is because I come from a family of doctors and nurses and wanted the NHS to be better. That's what got me involved. So what's gone wrong then? So what's happened there? So you said, Leslie, about the pandemic's over. One of the problems there is the pandemic had a huge impact on our health service because so much of normal healthcare stopped to look after people with COVID, or because people were very worried and weren't able to come and get the treatment or diagnosis they usually would because of the risk of catching COVID. So one thing we have is the backlogs of people waiting because they didn't get the care that they would normally have done because of the pandemic. And that is taking time to bring down. So that's one of the reasons why it's hard to get the healthcare that you want at the moment. It still shouldn't be as you've experienced. The other thing is the growing need for healthcare that we have as a population, which is something that started increasing, was increasing before the pandemic and seems to have really accelerated since. And it's affecting many, many countries. It's affecting other parts of the UK as well, in Labour-run Wales, in SNP-run Scotland, and other countries also facing these challenges. Let me say 2 things about what the government is doing about this, working clearly with the NHS in England. Firstly, working really, really hard to reduce those backlogs following COVID, reduce the number of people who are waiting a long time, and making some progress.
The waiting list is growing, as you know. It's at a record high.
There is that. But what we have managed to do in England is we have brought down the number of people waiting more than 2 years, a really long time.
I know, but overall it's grown because there are more people on the rest of the waiting list.
Step by step. First of all, the people waiting over 2 years, virtually eliminated. Now the people waiting over 18 months, virtually eliminated. Something Labour-run NHS in Wales has not managed to do. So next year we expect to bring down the waiting list overall. One of the things that's happening here is more people coming forward. So, for instance, in cancer, around an extra 20% more people than usual coming forward for cancer checks. This is a good thing, the right thing to do, much greater awareness of cancer. It's helping us diagnose, it's helping us catch more cancers early than ever before. That is the right thing to do to improve outcomes, but it is putting that huge pressure. Also, as we work to recover the NHS, it doesn't need to, we're supporting the NHS to change with a world in which, for instance, a country in which more people are living with multiple health conditions. Around 1 in 4 people live with more than one health condition. So what that involves is more people being cared for out of hospital by joined-up teams across health and social care.
Not getting to see her GP at all, so...
I realise that, and so we need to fix that. And now, across the country, there are now 26,000 more people working in primary care. We need to make sure that comes and helps you, Leslie, as well.
So in Scotland, where undoubtedly, yes, we have problems, we have also a much better story to tell because...
Well, you've got the BMA saying the situation with GPs is critical.
Yes,
inadequate workworkforce planning, chronic underinvestment. Yep. So all is not rosy in the garden.
Oh, absolutely not. No, there's always room for improvement. But again, I would just highlight the fact that it's still a better story than what Westminster can tell. But with the NHS being involved in Scotland...
How is it better,
I'll tell you.
OK.
So with the NHS being devolved in Scotland, although the purse strings aren't devolved, the power to implement the healthcare service is there. And with that one free hand, what we've been able to do, as was mentioned earlier on, we've been able to introduce free prescriptions, free personal and nursing care, and regardless of age. But where Scotland in particular is running into a problem is with social care. And part of that reason is something that nobody in Westminster wants to talk about, is Brexit. Because we cannot find the staff to fulfil all the duties that are required within the NHS and social care. And just to touch also on Hugh's point there, in the 8 years that I've been elected, I meet lots of experts and charities and organisations that live and breathe this stuff. And I find myself asking them, look, how many problems, particularly when it comes to mental health and just health in general, how many problems would be solved if people had more money in their pockets and they weren't forced to either skip on meals or go for the cheap meal deal or go for the McDonald's because it's cheaper than actually getting a bit of fruit and veg? That's where in Scotland we've been able to not only tailor our NHS, but also work towards a wellbeing economy, because everything works in tandem. You've got to give people the powers and the money to be able to make healthy decisions, and that is the starting point for making Britain a healthier country.
OK, let's hear a little bit more from our audience. We're almost out of time. Man there in the glasses, yeah.
I'm a paramedic who retired this month, and so I've worked through the pandemic and been involved in the NHS for many years. Interestingly, we've just been talking about the failure of privatisation in the water industry. Why are we not addressing the failure of privatisation within our own NHS? Not even Labour are looking at privatisation. In fact, you want to increase privatisation. Privatisation is failing the NHS, just like it's failed the water.
Okay. And what aspect in particular? Is it that it's taking consultants away from work that they could be doing for the NHS?
If things are privatised, you have to spend money on lawyers, tendering, accountants. It's not about delivering a service, it's about making profits for the companies involved.
OK. Let's hear from the man right at the front here.
How on earth do you recruit for these positions that we need to fill when public sector pay is an absolute national scandal at the moment? You know, so we've got police officers, teachers, healthcare. You know, they're not being paid what they're due. They took us through the pandemic, and what are we doing to reward them? Absolutely nothing.
OK. And the man in the grey sweater there. Hang on, we'll just get a microphone to you. There you go.
So, Helen, you say that you got into politics to help people, and you've been part of a party that over the past 13 years has systematically broken down our NHS. So, to go back to a question you were asked earlier, how do you sleep at night?
Helen, I better let you answer that.
Well, I think that, it's hard times for the NHS, as I said a moment ago, coming through the pandemic, but the NHS did an extraordinary job during the pandemic and continues to do an extraordinary job caring for so many of us day in, day out. Yes, we know that it's difficult. We know that people like Leslie, and there's a terrible example, having to wait for treatment. But actually, the NHS is doing some fantastic work. As I said, catching more cancers earlier than ever before. The one-year survival rate from cancer used to be 2/3 of people would survive. Now it's 3/4 of people survive. That's compared to 2010 to now. Those sorts of improvements are happening in our health system. And we want to look ahead now. Very soon, we're going to be announcing our long-term workforce plan.
That's coming tomorrow, isn't it? That's what we're being told.
And that is very important.
Yes, tomorrow.
I'm expecting
quickly before we end. Right,
very
OK.
important for the future of the NHS.
All right. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're out of time, I'm afraid. I had a couple more questions I wanted to get to, but we ran out of time, so forgive me, those of you who are going to put those questions. That is it for this week. Remember, we are in Fleetwood in Lancashire next week if you want to come and be part of the programme. Also, we are on a podcast on BBC Sounds after this programme. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to all of you for coming in here at Exeter University. Great to see you. And, of course, thank you at home for watching. Till next week, bye-bye.
Thank you very much.